This is CNN Breaking News.
Hello, everyone. I'm Frederica Whitfield. We begin with breaking news. The polls are now closed in France's crucial presidential election after a bitterly fought campaign. We're waiting on early estimates now. It's an election that pitted the far-right candidate Marine Le Pen against centrist Emmanuel Macron. Le Pen, an admirer of President Donald Trump, campaigned on an anti-immigration and anti-European Union platform. Macron, who has never held elected office, came from the back of the pack calling for more tolerance and more globalization. And in a twist that has stunned many political observers, France's two dominant mainstream parties were completely shut out of the final vote. Let's get right to a CNN chief international correspondent, Christian Amanpour, who is at the Macron rally in Paris. So, Christian, Emmanuel Macron wasn't even a contender early on in the race. How did we get to this point?
I cannot tell you the feeling here right now. The entire esplanade here at the Louvre Palace has exploded in joy. 65.9% for Emmanuel Macron, according to the projections by our affiliate BFM TV. That is even more than he was expected to get in the last 2 weeks of the second round campaign. And Marine Le Pen, the extreme right-wing nationalist, has got less than 40%. This is a big, big deal. The entire world, certainly the democratic world, certainly the Western world, has been watching this election because it is not just important for France, but for Europe and for everyone. This, after the nationalist populist wave that started with Brexit, traveled across the Atlantic to you with Donald Trump's victory, has now halted for the moment this populist nationalist wave here in Europe. And this, make no mistake about it, was not just about two outsiders. This was about two dramatically opposing worldviews. Emmanuel Macron, a 39-year-old who left the Socialist Party, started his own En Marche movement forward just 1 year ago, has managed to get to this point, 65.9% according to the predictions right now, to win an election that he wasn't even meant to be a proper candidate, perhaps not even into the second round. Marine Le Pen, whose entire political heritage is based on the extreme right-wing movement of her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, inward-looking nationalist, has lost this election. And so everybody around this country, for sure, around Europe and around the rest of the democratic world, is breathing a sigh of relief, because Marine Le Pen said that she would conduct radical policies, pull France out of the euro, have a Frexit vote, potentially pulling it out of the EU. And with Brexit out, that, according to the EU, would have collapsed the entire European Union project. Pull it out of NATO, put up protectionist borders, all sorts of dramatic policies, and immediate halt to immigration as well. Emmanuel Macron, exactly the opposite, though knowing that he has to do something to address the economic issues and bring back more work for more people, especially young people in this country. Back to you.
So, Christian, voter turnout expected to be somewhere in the upwards of 75% in France, which is a huge number. While we're talking about these early estimates that right now put Macron in the lead, is there a way in which to express the kind of worry or concern across Europe pending whatever the outcome were to be here?
Well, here's the thing. It sounds like a massive turnout, and of course it is compared to American turnout numbers and numbers in other countries. But, in fact, it is quite lower than it was, let's say, in 2012, the last round of elections. And it's lower than they expected for this second round, because generally the second round has a slightly higher turnout. We had something like 80% or just over that for the first round 2 weeks ago. The big story of this round was that there was going to be a heavy abstention rate, and that appears to have come true. And people, certainly in the Emmanuel Macron camp, were incredibly worried that if there was a low turnout, that would only benefit Marine Le Pen, because her voters were committed. They were a hardcore of voters who were going to come to the polls no matter what. And so many people after the first round said, you know, we are not going to come out and vote if it's these two candidates. And they did, though, and they put him over the top. and that has really caused a huge sigh of relief around the majority of this country, obviously, the majority of Europe, and presumably much of the rest of the democratic world.
All right, Christian, again, final numbers are not in, but just looking at the pictures of the outpouring of support there at the Louvre there in that beautiful big courtyard like park where so many people have turned out there in support of Emmanuel Macron. What have people there been saying about their candidate, why it is they were in support of him as you look at this very diverse picture of supporters?
Well, you can see here that you've got, thousands of the French tricolor, the red, white, and blue, being flown. Now, that's important because Marine Le Pen tried to, claim patriotism for herself and her far-right nationalist party. Macron has come out and said you can be patriotic and French and outward-looking and have reformist programs. So the flying of the flag is actually quite important. Not only that, the massive number of people who you can see on various cameras who are pouring into the Louvre Esplanade right here. Now, just so we know, the Louvre is an ancient French palace. It is also the main museum. Tourists will know it for the Mona Lisa and all the other fantastic art that is housed in this museum. So it's an ancient museum, but in the center of it stands a fairly modern glass pyramid. So you've got old and new, you've got patriotic and reform. You've got all the symbolism that comes with what Macron is trying to tell the world for what he's trying to do. They chose this quite carefully. It is outside. They're lucky it wasn't raining. It's a little chilly, but that hasn't damped down the enthusiasm of the people who are literally, as I'm looking ahead of me, they're not just stacked up behind me, they're literally still pouring in, flooding in. And I've been talking to a lot of my colleagues, and I've covered French elections before. We haven't actually seen in the last 20, 30 years this kind of excitement for a second round and for people coming in from all over to see the result and come to this particular headquarters. The last time there was a risk of an extremist winning the French presidency was when Marine Le Pen's father made it to the second round in 2002, and I covered that as well. And at that time, all the other parties, all of them, left, right, everybody got together and told their voters to make sure the National Front did not win. And therefore, Jacques Chirac, who became president, or was re-elected then, won by 82%. That was massive. This time, it's still a big win for Macron, but it's not as big. And I guess, history has moved forward a little bit, and there were hundreds of thousands of people, French people, who came out into the streets after the first round last time to say, not in my name, no National Front will win these elections. That did not happen this time. After the first round, there were no protests in the streets when she came in second and came into the final round of voting.
Now, it can't be overlooked, however, Christian, the importance of the rise of Le Pen and the rise of this populist movement. It made a statement with her win to be in this runoff. But then now what does her potential defeat, again, the numbers are not in, the estimates just show that Macron is in the lead, but if there is a potential defeat of Le Pen, what does that say about this populist movement?
Well, for now, it says that when it comes to the French presidency, it didn't win. However, you're absolutely right. It has had more votes than ever before in history, and therefore the issues are still going to be out there competing. What will be very determinative is what happens at the end of June when the French go to yet another round of elections, but this time for the parliament, the legislative elections. Because remember, there's only a couple of National Front MPs, deputies, represented, elected officials inside the National Assembly, and there are no En Marche representatives because it's never been tested by the public before. It's a brand new party. So Emmanuel Macron is hoping that he can gather a majority off the back of this election victory. And of course, we're waiting to see the full and final election results precisely. But he's hoping that once they get to June, he'll be able to get enough voters to be able to pass legislation. If not, he's going to have to go into all sorts of deals and coalitions on various issues with other parties. So we're going to have to wait and see how decisive his win translates into the, as you would call it, congressional elections in the United States, parliamentary elections here.
And Chris John, you know, Marine Le Pen ran on the idea of leaving the EU. You discussed with me some trepidation that other European countries had about the potential outcome if it were to be in the favor of Le Pen. Again, the numbers are still not in completely. Potentially, what does this French outcome, the new French president, mean for relations between the U.S. and France and potentially the rest of the European Union with France?
Well, look, this is going to be interesting because it was quite clear that President Trump probably saw Marine Le Pen as a soul sister. There was a lot of tweeting that went on. There was a lot of his advisors and others like Steve Bannon and Breitbart and all the others actually throwing their weight behind Marine Le Pen because they saw it as a continuation of this so-called populist movement. And even in the last few days, Nigel Farage of Britain threw his support behind Marine Le Pen too. Now, it's important that he stayed away from her for a long
Chris John,
time.
You're hearing potentially the cheers of what we're hearing is that estimates show that Macron... Yeah, the estimates are showing, according to our affiliate there, that Macron has won. That's the final consensus from the estimates that we're hearing from. Perhaps that is why you're hearing the cheers there at Le Louvre there, Chris John. No, she's trying to figure out from people around you.
We're seeing the cheers, but we're hearing boos because Marine Le Pen's face has just come on the face, and an ally of hers just came out on television, and so we heard a lot of boos then, and we just saw her face as well. So this is the the division that you see in France right now, and there obviously is going to be a lot of major effort to going into governing as we go forward, because there are issues, there are structural problems with the labor market, with the unions. So behind us we have a Macron supporter.
Okay, so Chris John, I'm just going to interrupt you while
talking about
that Macron has won. I want to interrupt you for a moment because Marine Le Pen apparently is speaking now. Let's listen in.
Seen that we are the first opposition forces to the new president. The little formations who have supported Macron have discredited themselves and have lost all kinds of legitimacy in wanting a deep change or profound change. We have seen a major decomposition of French political life, of the old traditional mainstream parties, and what we see now is a real new configuration which is emerging, a rift between the patriots and the neoliberals, and this is what we're going to fight at the legislative assembly, legislative elections, and I will head that, and to make sure that all people who want the prosperity and security, the identity of France, which we are very concerned about at the beginning of this new 5-year term. And we have to renew our forces at this historic event, and I propose, therefore, that we embark on a completely new phase for our party, which the French want and which is absolutely necessary for the country to get on their feet again, I urge all my supporters to commit to this decisive campaign which is going to begin this evening, and France will really need you in this. Long live the Republic, long live France.
All right, you're listening to what sounds like a concession speech right there from 48-year-old Marine Le Pen, the nationalist right-wing candidate there. Now that we have estimates showing that she is defeated by Emmanuel Macron, the centrist, and you heard her describe the landscape as a decomposition of political life, and she pledged there to continue to be a part of the movement. She described an ongoing rift between, in her words, patriots and liberals. So again, estimates now, final count in, we understand that Emmanuel Macron has won the French presidency in this second phase and final phase of voting. Christian Amanpour is there at the Louvre there in Paris, which that esplanade is filled with supporters of Macron. And so were people listening to Le Pen in that concession speech? I know you mentioned earlier her image appeared, people booed, but were they listening to what she had to say just now?
Not really. There was a different channel on while that was going on here. But, you know, it's interesting, you know, what she said. I mean, you know, that was a divisive speech. She's talking about, you know, a conflict or divisions between patriots. You see, the National Front claimed that they're the only patriots,
and liberals.
And the neoliberals, progressives, as she was saying. So that is obviously her trying to whip up her supporters for these legislative elections that I was talking about, which are going to be decisive for the French National Assembly and will basically set the stage for how the next president, Emmanuel Macron, will be able to govern. So this is where we are. There was no sort of, she did congratulate him, to be fair. She congratulated him. She has received a significant percentage less than she was hoping for. Obviously, she was hoping to win, but the polls were suggesting she might get as many as 40%. And she's got, at least according to right now, in the 34% region. Again, we're waiting to find the actual final figures that they give us. But so far, the polls and the exit polls have been, okay, she's walking out now, and on the big screen there, they're showing her, and there is a boo going up here. So just to show that, you know, this is divisive, this is divided, and people, certainly here, resent a lot about the National Front, particularly the appeal to fear-mongering, the anti-immigration platform that she ran on, and the very divisive platform that she ran on, which, to be frank, was in very, very stark contrast to the hope, to the forward-looking, to the appeal to tolerance and reform that Emmanuel Macron ran on. And you know that politicians, for instance, President Obama, the former president, also taped an appeal for Macron and said that, you know, everybody was watching and that France was very important to America and to choose the politics of hope over fear. So too did the mayor of London. We know that he's sort of been in touch over the past few weeks or so, and he also ran a very, very divisive campaign, or rather the campaign against him was very, very divisive, and he always goes out there, Sadiq Khan, the first Muslim mayor of London, to tout running and succeeding on the politics of hope and dismissing the politics of fear. So here, this is what we have, you know, we have these two world visions that are still in competition, whether in Britain right now, whether in the United States right now, and in parts of Europe right now. So what France has done, coming after the Netherlands in March, coming after Austria before that, these three countries have said no to fear, no to xenophobia, no to hate, and they have said no to this inward-looking nationalism. It doesn't mean to say everything's perfect and there's not a long way to go and a lot of work to be done to meet the legitimate needs of all the populations and to meet and to stop this growing inequality gap across our developed world. But now, again, huge cheers going up because they're showing numbers, 65.5 on and 34.5. Anyway, that's according to the screen behind me. That's not our affiliate, but it's according to the screen behind me, and that is what people are cheering.
Okay, Christian Amanpour at the Louvre there in Paris again.